Well, happy Give Thanks for Massacre Day. And so somebody called it um, Smallpox Blankets Day. Let me just make sure I got sound. Because nobody's waiting. Let's see if we got sound. No, I want to find out if we got sound. Hello, do we have sound? Hello, do we have sound? Yes, we do. Okay. So, hello. Is everybody gorged today on somebody else's land? This is a lot of folks have been realizing in the past 50 years. It's been 50 years that this year was the 50th year. This is 50 years that they've been occupying Alcatraz on Thanksgiving, or they have on Thanksgiving Day. That started 50 years ago. I don't know exactly. We'll read the history. But we're going to start with something my friend D. Robinson, D. Nighthawk Robinson wrote in a few comments that he got into a conversation with a Brit. And D is legit Cherokee royalty. He's got like these guys today because that's the one in Plymouth Rock. There was a Cherokee. He had a bunch of Cherokee chiefs in his there's like 70 of them in his lineage, and he was taught the stories. He comes from a traditional family. Most people as kids heard the story of how Thanksgiving began when the Indians and the Pilgrims sat down together and had a nice meal, and that did happen one time. But in 1614, English explorers sailed back to England with a ship full of Patuxent Indians bound for slavery. They left behind smallpox that virtually wiped out all who escaped. By the time the Pilgrims arrived at Massachusetts Bay, they were greeted by one living Patuxent Indian, a man named Squanto, who had survived slavery in England. There's more to that story, because actually they were sold into slavery in Spain, and Squanto made his way to England and then back to the States somehow, or back to this continent somehow. The wiki doesn't really say. He managed to escape and made his way home. When he landed, he realized his whole tribe had vanished. When the Pilgrims landed, they were surprised to meet this savage who could speak English. Squanto taught them how to fish and grow food. Without this help, they would have died that winter. He negotiated a peace treaty between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag Nation at the end of England about the bountiful land in the New World, and religious zealots called Puritans began arriving by the boatload. Joined by other British settlers, they seized land, captured strong young natives who had made good slaves, and killed the rest. The Pequot Nation had not agreed to that peace treaty between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims and fought back. In 1637, over 700 men, women, and children of the Pequot tribe had gathered for their annual Green Corn Festival. Right before sunrise, while they were sleeping, they were surrounded by English and Dutch mercenaries. They ordered the men to come out, and when they did, they were shot or clubbed to death. While the women and children were huddled together inside, they set fire to the longhouses and burnt them alive. The next day, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony declared a day of Thanksgiving, and they had a big festival. Confidence grew among the Pilgrims, and later they began to burn village after village. Boatloads full, as many as 500 natives were sent back to Europe as slaves. Bounties were paid to ensure as many natives massacred against the Pequot tribe close to where Stamford, Connecticut would later be. Churches announced the second day of Thanksgiving for the killing of so many heathen savages. During this second Thanksgiving, men and boys kicked the severed heads of natives through the streets like soccer balls. Even the friendly Wampanoag who signed that peace treaty did not escape their madness. Their chief was beheaded and his head impaled on a pole in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where it remained on display for 24 years after each successful massacre. Years later, George Washington suggested that only one day a year be held to celebrate all the massacres each year. You know, the story of George Washington's relationship with the Indians is pretty, like, how do you say, been whitewashed real well. They had a nickname for it, village killer or something like that. Um, Later, Abraham Lincoln decided to make Thanksgiving a national holiday, hoping to bring the southern and northern states back together after the Civil War. And that very same day, Lincoln sent troops to attack starving Sioux people in Minnesota. Remember that Indian people had been holding their own celebrations to honor the Creator and to give thanks for hundreds of years, however, post this story, which is not bloody likely. And an amen to that. So do we have anybody here, anybody making silly noises? Uh, yeah. Yeah, well, he's, you know, it's, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think it was 70 or 17. I don't know. It was a lot. It was a whole lot. I mean, it comes from a royal line. He tells amazing stories of a lot of detail about things that are in the history books. Like the long walk, the Trail of Tears, for instance. His family was involved in that. And they pass it. The history is written by the winners, but the truth is told by the survivors' descendants, and that's one of the things I'm going to cover tonight. Let's get that next. This is where it's at, as far as the whole world has been brought under the thumb of a bunch of European aristocrats. That's really what's happened. And they've totally disrupted hundreds of native cultures. These are all individual cultures. They all have their own lot. There were like 500 and some odd different languages in North America when Columbus landed here. And the Europeans have gone and we got this industrial society that just is not compatible with nature. It just isn't. And they're going to find out soon. Scientists have been warning them for 50 years now, that I know of, at least. Everything that's happening today is oh, that's right. I wanted to read some comments because this is where it's at. This is where it's at. Where to go? Okay, here's what D reacted to this. This guy, here's the Brit. He said the indigenous people are still persecuted to this very day and been turned into little more than tourist attractions. Again, most of the things I talk about in this post were done by Europeans who eventually became Americans. I don't know where you're from. If you look at his profile, it's obvious. But I'm sure bad things have happened to your people or other people from there. Yeah, well, long before his memory. This post was not written to create more hate, but to correct the history that was told and hopefully to prevent these kinds of atrocities again. Governments and different religions around the world have caused a lot of pain. But please do not try and tell me that my people are nothing more than a damn tourist attraction. We survived the greatest genocide in the history of the world, and we are still here. And luckily for the world, because we're here to save this planet from the madness it has fallen into. And then we're going to go off into governments and religions, because that's really where it's at. It's like, it's not the religions themselves, it's the leaders, the politicians. The none of the religions teach people to do any of this shit that the politicians convince them to do. Never have. Never have. So let's see what else is going on. So here's the Native Americans to hold 50th gathering of grief in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Descendants of the Wampanoag tribe that helped the newcomers survive, they're determined to ensure the world doesn't forget the disease, racism, and oppression the European settlers brought. They brought it everywhere. I mean, that's what the coup was in Bolivia last week. They, that it was an indigenous government had taken over socialist indigenous government, and they were trying to nationalize everything, and they need the lithium for the batteries. So they had to get rid, needed a regime change, because the guy was not friendly to the extraction industries. So happy Thanksgiving to you and the land your forefathers stole. That's the In Your Feast message Native Americans are preparing to send as they convene their 50th annual National Day of Mourning in the seaside town where the Pilgrims settled. United American Indians of New England has held the solemn remembrance on every Thanksgiving Day since 1970 to recall what organizers describe as the genocide of millions of Native people, the theft of Native lands, and the relentless assault on Native culture. But Thursday's gathering will have particular resonance, and Indigenous people say a fresh sense of urgency. Plymouth is putting the final touches on next year's 400th anniversary commemorations of the Pilgrims' landing in 1620. As the 2020 events approach, descendants of the Wampanoag tribe that helped the newcomers survive are determined to ensure the world doesn't forget the disease, racism, and oppression the European settlers brought. The focus is always on the Pilgrims. We're just going to keep telling the truth, she said. We talk about the history because we must, said Matteau and Monroe, co-leader of the group. More and more non-Native people have been listening to us. They're trying to adjust their prism. As they have on every Thanksgiving for the past half century, participants will assemble at noon on Coles Hill, a windswept mound overlooking Plymouth Rock, a memorial to the colonists' arrival. Beneath a giant bronze statue of Massasoit, the Wampanoag leader in 1620, Native Americans from tribes around New England will beat drums, offer prayers, and read speeches before marching through Plymouth's historic district, joined by dozens of sympathetic supporters. Organizers say they'll also call attention to the plight of missing and murdered Indigenous women, as well as government crackdowns on migrants from Latin America and the detention of children. Promotional posters proclaim, "We didn't cross the border crossed us." Past gatherings have mourned lives through the nationwide opioid addiction crisis, shown solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and condemned environmental degradation. The tradition was born of Plymouth's last big birthday bash in 1970, a 350th anniversary celebration commemoration that triggered angry demonstrations by Native people, excluded from a decidedly Pilgrim-focused observance. Since then, the National Day of Mourning has become a louder and prouder and increasingly multi-ethnic affair in the community nicknamed America's hometown. Although mostly peaceable, there has been tension. In 1997, 25 protesters were arrested after a march through town erupted into a melee with the police. There have also been colorful moments. Over the decades, activists have ceremonially buried Plymouth Rock in sand, boarded the Mayflower II, a replica of the ship that carried the English settlers to the New World, and draped the Ku Klux Klan garb on a statue of William Bradford, a Pilgrim father who eventually became governor of the Plymouth Bay Colony. In a like-minded tradition dating to 1975, tribes in the San Francisco area hold a similar ceremony called on Thanksgiving Day, gathering at sunrise on Alcatraz Island to recall how Native Americans occupied the island in protest for 19 months in November 1969. Francis Bremer, a Pilgrim scholar and professor emeritus of history at Pennsylvania's Millersville University, thinks the nation is becoming more receptive to a side of the story that's too often ignored. 50 years ago, for non-Native people, these were uncomfortable truths they didn't want to hear. Now they're necessary truths. To help right old wrongs, Monroe's coalition is pushing what it calls the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda. Among other things, the campaign includes a proposal to redesign the state flag, which critics say is repressive. It depicts a muscular arm yielding a broadsword over a Native American holding a bow. Yeah, I'd say that is something they want to get off the flag. And they're worried about the mascots on a sports team. That's on a state flag. I never knew that. Paula Peters, a Wampanoag writer and activist who isn't a member of the group that organizes public mourning, sees progress in getting Americans to look past the Thanksgiving myth of the Pilgrims and natives coexisting peacefully. We've come a long way, she said. We can't continue to honor our ancestors by taking our history out of the margins and into the forefront. I think that's all for that. Hello, Frederick. Thanks for joining me. And then, I think that's all of them. Was that it? We could go into Russian trolls. So that's up here. I don't know what. Oh, here's the thing. Here's the thing on Thanksgiving Day. This Thanksgiving marks 50 years since natives occupied Alcatraz. They want you to remember why. For most Americans, Thanksgiving is a holiday. We come together with family and friends to express gratitude by feasting, drinking, and arguing. We retell an old story that in 1621, European settlers gathered with members of the Wampanoag tribe to celebrate a successful harvest, which is true, but it's not the whole truth, implying rosy relations between the Pilgrims and Indians. Just 15 years later, colonial soldiers massacred 400 Pequot men, women, and children in retaliation for a settler's death. The next day, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony proclaimed a day of thanksgiving and celebration for subduing the Pequots. For hundreds of years, non-natives have continued to celebrate Thanksgiving, while for many indigenous people it remains a day of mourning. Native Americans in Northern California gather annually for a sunrise ceremony called On Thanksgiving Day on Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay. This year's gathering, though, was special. It marked 50 years since Bay Area natives, having left reservations and flocked to cities, staked a claim to Alcatraz, where the infamous federal prison was decommissioned in 1963. November 20th, 1969, indigenous activists began their 19-month occupation of the island, a watershed moment for Native organizing that pushed Richard Nixon to end the brutal termination era, which over 100 tribes lost federal assistance. The occupation sparked a chain reaction of radical organizing that continues to this day. While remembering that occupation, on Thanksgiving Day also honors a much more expansive legacy of indigenous resistance, one spanning more than 500 years. Before the sun rose this morning in San Francisco, members of many different tribes, clad in traditional regalia, performed dances to honor their ancestors. Elders came forward to acknowledge, thank, and make offerings to the Ohlone people who are indigenous to the region, while Native Hawaiian and Oglala Lakota women offered prayers for the earth in a time of climate chaos. Many spoke about ongoing religious struggles, such as the police repression of Native efforts to protect lands like the sacred Hawaiian mountain Mauna Kea and the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. While dire, these issues were discussed against a general background of camaraderie as long distance friends and allies were reunited. Daisy Franker of the Oneida Nation said it was the biggest turnout she's seen in 3 years of attending the ceremony. In this political climate, coming here is my way of honoring those who sacrificed so much we can have our rights recognized locally and globally. It's really fantastic to see a lot of our old friends from throughout the years. Lenata Warjack of the Bannock Nation 73 said, everybody is still here, still trying to do whatever they can and bring their younger generations back as well. Warjack, who has been referred to as real leader of the occupation by one Alcatraz vet, was part of the initial landing party that stormed the island in 1969, evading U.S. Coast Guard boats and aircraft that were trying to stop them. Later, when she wasn't negotiating with Nixon's proxies, Warjack hitchhiked to and from the island with her young son via sailboat to attend classes at UC Berkeley. This morning, ferries departing from San Francisco at 3 a.m., one of the first things you see as you approach the island, which is now administered by the National Park Service, is the pro-Indigenous graffiti, Indians Welcome and Indian Land, that has been preserved since the occupation. Stepping off the boat, the crowd was met with the smell of sage and Palo Santo wafting through the island's hills. By 5 a.m., several thousand people had converged in a circle around a bonfire, brandishing tribal flags and hats with slogans like "Make America Indigenous Again." The Trump administration is making us look like strangers in our own home, said Jesus Perez Moya, who has returned to Alcatraz almost every year since he delivered supplies to the occupation as a student in 1969. The people they're calling illegal immigrants are Mayans, Oaxacanos, Yaquis, and other tribes from Central America. We're here to bring a new consciousness so we can stop the massacres of indigenous people in the Amazon throughout the Americas. Warjack noted the fight to keep our water clean and protect Mother Earth is very difficult because we don't have a very big voice. But it shouldn't just be on Native people. All people need to be supporting, because without water, there's no life. A Huifala flag, commonly used to represent indigenous people in Bolivia, flew above the crowd made up of mostly natives, and also included a notable ally to their movement. Oh, that's what he was doing. Former San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick. In 2017, Colin Kaepernick was honored by, I guess this was a couple of years ago he was there, honored by American Indian Movement elder Fred Short for his commitment to racial justice. For about 4 hours, a group of Aztec Mexica dancers performed a closing ceremony, and a crowd boarded ferries to return to the San Francisco Pier. Canyon Sayers Roods has attended on Thanksgiving Day and another sunrise ceremony on the island on Indigenous Peoples Day each October all her life. As a Mutsun Ohlone, she is indigenous to what's now called the Bay Area and is frequently asked to bless events in the region because she was raised with knowledge of local indigenous traditions. Thanksgiving is a time to honor truth in history, Sayers Roods told Mother Jones earlier this week, which is the purpose for this broadcast. Let's get real. It's time to get real, because the planet's going to get real on us any minute now. I mean, it's already doing it. I want to be mad at the holiday. However, it's still rooted and founded in indigenous practice of celebrating the harvest in the fall. No, it's that time of year. But this year, Sayers Roots skipped the Alcatraz ceremony to spend time with relatives in Indian Canyon, a rare slice of California coast governed by indigenous people, a reality for which she thanks her mother, Anne Marie Sayers, who persevered in an 8-year legal battle. This is a colonialist and capitalist holiday, says Sayers Roots, but it can still be a time to share space with family and the land. For sure. Hey, Bob Dog. Yeah. Happy day. I guess that's about it. That was all I had to read. Let me drive off the trolls, play a little music. See what anybody's got to say. Otherwise, I'm gonna just bail. I got. It's hard for me to talk too much because then I start coughing from all the dust, and my jaw gets shitty. So I had the horn on. I was actually trying to work on some tunes, but I ain't playing any of them. Not until I actually have them ready to play. And it just doesn't want to go anywhere. um, anyway, since nobody wants to talk to me, I spoke my piece, and I'm just not in the mood to sit here and think of more shit to say. So, thanks for coming. Happy day. Bye bye.